Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. If you are a cast member of this show, do not use what I'm saying as a replacement for an assessment or for any psychological treatment or evaluation because I'm just reacting to an edited TV show. Keep that in mind. Let's watch.
You kind of either just stay on the surface or you get deep.
Okay, I've got a deep question for you.
All right, hit me.
What are you like when there is conflict in a relationship? Do you ever get upset and yell or say anything hurtful?
No.
Okay, that's a great question. I would hope that a lot of the cast members who are serious about, by the way, I'm seated now. I don't know if that's disorienting at all. I have one of those motorized standing desks, and I really like the standing desk. It's a lot more comfortable to stand for long periods of time than sit. But when I stand for a long time, sometimes it actually starts to hurt the bottoms of my feet. I understand why cashiers sometimes have those rubber pads that they stand on. Anyway, and that was a great question that Alex asked. By the way, to give you an update on where we're at, Alex likes Madison. Madison likes Alex and Mason equally, she would say, seemingly liking both of them a lot. Mason likes Madison and Meg equally, and then Meg likes Mason. So it's sort of like two overlapping triangles. And they all seem like people that would be rooted for. I'm rooting for them. At this point, there's no red flags. We can't know. There's actually a lot of positive things that Alex and Madison have talked about. They've both been through bullying and difficult childhoods, and they bonded around that, and they seem to have a pretty good understanding of what effect that had on them. It seems to have made them stronger in their words. So there's that. But Alex just asked Madison, in conflict, do you yell? I wonder if this is a question that was prompted by the showrunners. From my understanding, they will sit everyone down in the morning and suggest different types of things that they can get into.
No, first of all, I can't physically yell.
Okay.
But also, I grew up with a really angry dad, and that's never who I want to be.
I'll take her word for it. It's hard to know what each of them are referring to when they say yell. Some people think that refers to being loud. Other people would include also being hurtful and hostile and angry, critical and intimidating somehow, or insulting, or that kind of thing. So it's hard to know what they're referring to, but I'll take her word for it. And she's telling us that she has additional trauma. She's saying that her dad would yell a lot, which is unfortunate. I feel bad for her.
Instead of getting mad or violent, I get very logical.
I like that.
Yeah. What about you?
Okay, so that's something I can talk about a little bit because it's often talked about in my office with couples. There will be this dichotomy between emotion and logic. And 100% of the time when I hear someone say that they are logical in conflict, I would not say logical. I wouldn't describe it as logical. I would describe it as, from the outside, maybe more masculine, maybe more calculating, cold would be another word potentially. I'm not saying that logic is bad. I'm saying that the way that people frame it, a common conceptualization that I will have in a couple, and if I were to use a hypothetical example of a heterosexual couple, you have the conflict that's happening and it's been going on for a long time, and the husband, my dogs are barking, the husband will claim that he's logical and really believes it, and maybe even his wife would describe him as being logical, and she is illogical and emotional. And when I actually observe, because sometimes I want to perturb the relationship, or at least not prevent them from getting into a typical fight, I want to observe how that plays out sometimes I can just glean from their descriptions, but sometimes I will hear logic, and then what I will observe is that this hypothetical example, the husband is actually extremely emotional, is hurt, but also exhibiting anger and hostility, and is framing the sentences in a way that can be mistaken for logic and lacking emotion, lacking bias, or lacking any sort of triggering issue. And, like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, let's say that you have a situation where you have this couple and they go to his family function, a birthday or something, and she's more on the shy side, and they have an agreement that he is supposed to try to help her socialize, or to not ignore her, to not just leave her in the corner by herself while she's just shyly stewing in her own isolation. And they have a history around that. So they go to the event with his family, and things don't go very well. She is isolated, and he notices that she's isolated and attempts to do some things, but not a lot. And on the way home, he's just trying to act like everything's fine. She's getting snippy with him on the way home, criticizing little things. And then he says something like, look, don't take it out on me because you were uncomfortable tonight. And then boom, explosion. She's angry and starts to cry and starts to yell at him. And he's very calm and cool and collected, and responds and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I walked up to you 3 or 4 times to try to engage with you, and you just shot it down. So what else am I supposed to do? And she's like, on some level, it resonates with her, but she doesn't know how to counter that. So she starts to flip out even more. And from the outside, it looks like he's the logical one. And from the inside of the relationship, it looks like he's the logical one. He isn't affected by his emotions. He sees things more accurately. And she's this emotional, crazy woman, that kind of stuff. It's it's often gendered, by the way, and there's sexism often involved. And there's also toxic masculinity. Men are supposed to be non-emotional and logical. And there's a whole history that I could talk about in terms of Spock and Data and others, these sort of ideals that are often, and also in anime in Japan, there's a similar ideal for men. The very common protagonist of a lot of anime is this extremely stoic dude who, like the quiet Ronin character, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, competent, never says a word, only when it matters, isn't affected by anything. Anyway, so there's that notion. But if we actually had some sort of God view on what happened at the party, we would absolutely see that he was not reaching out to her, that he had some gestures, but it was not much. And what was happening for him was, going into the party, he was hoping that she would enjoy herself because he loves her and he wants her to enjoy herself. But he resents how she has been shy. And so he, in a passive, hostile manner, will not actually put much effort into it, might even try to prove that it's her fault that she is shy. And she is shy in this scenario. It is partially her fault. But he's not being warm. When he approaches her, he's doing things that kind of give the look, or give him the excuse to say, look, I reached out to you, but it wasn't really an earnest. He could have done a lot more if he wasn't busted up because of the past resentment that he has. And there are justifiable reasons why he has that resentment, maybe. And the scenario, I'm not saying either one of them is more to blame. They're both contributing to the problem. But definitely I would not say that he's the logical one. He has resentment. He has hurt. He has anxiety, he has anger, he has hostility, he has lack of objectivity. But the way he's presenting it in the conflict is he's not the one to yell and lose control over his emotions or his words. He doesn't tend to exaggerate in a conflict, but he also isn't really aware of what is motivating his behavior. If you hooked him up to a lie detector test, he would claim that he had no emotion about it and he was fine either way. But because of his upbringing and whatnot, he's cut off from his emotions and doesn't even know that he is actually operating from resentment and anger and hurt. So 99, if not 100% of the time, when I hear an individual say, I'm logical in conflicts, that's an indication of a lack of understanding. And we have heard from Madison that she went through a lot of difficulty. Something's going on there, right? With all of us, there's some way that she coped with it. And she's 27. So typically the amount of therapy and the amount of time to work on those kinds of, especially with the way she described it, it would be extremely unusual, but possible. There's a lot of protective factors that could have been at play, like she could have had other people in her life, grandparents, that kind of stuff, that could have protected her from the abuse and the rough childhood, as she put it, that she went through. But typically, with a history like that, it would take potentially decades to get 50% down the road. It doesn't mean that you're doomed by any means. It just means that it's hard. And there are neurological reactions that an individual have as an adult based on their past. So I would guess that there's something going on there with her. There's some kind of sign, some sort of effect in her adult life that is a result of that past. She hasn't said she doesn't have those things, but I wouldn't be surprised if in conflict, especially, there would be some kind of tendency that would be less constructive and more destructive. As all of us are destructive in conflict. If you can be the most luckiest person on the planet, be raised extremely well, been through tons of therapy, regardless of that, and still, I would say at least 50% of the time in conflict, you're not being constructive. The most we can hope for is 50% of the time we're not being destructive. So she's not unusual, but I'm guessing that mentioning that, that I'm logical, that in her experience in past fights, she would be extremely illogical, so to speak, and very emotional. But because of her upbringing, she either denies it or copes with it in a certain way and is maybe dealing with people who are more volatile, and she walks away in comparison saying that she's quote unquote the more logical one. I don't know that though. She also could be referring to logic as something much more constructive, something that I would conceptualize if I observed it as, oh, I see what you're saying. By logic, because the thing that I will counter my clients when they say they're being logical is I will say, eventually, once I have a good enough relationship with them to handle this kind of confrontation, is I will say, what I'm observing from you isn't logic, because it's logical to acknowledge your emotions because you're a human being, and in your primary attachment, there is conflict and strife. So it's logical that you would have emotions. And I see a lot of signs of those emotions, but I don't see any tending or expression or sharing of those emotions. That's not logical. That's denying emotion. That is often described or labeled as logical. But now, if you were a computer, then yeah, it would be logical to not acknowledge your emotion because you don't have any emotion. But to deny emotion is not logical. You need to understand it, express it, have ways of communicating about it, have ways of taking care of yourself, get your needs met. And if you're just going over the tiny details of transgressions and you tend to be the more calm one in conflict, that's not a recipe for happiness.
Who I want to be, instead of getting like mad or violent, I get very logical.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'll stop yammering, but it's also possible that because of her childhood, she has this dichotomy between mad and violent and logical. And so she might think, as long as I'm not being mad, hostile, aggressive, violent, then I'm doing the other thing, which is being logical. When there are lots of different other things besides those two things, plus there's a spectrum, right? I'm not accusing her of anything. I have no reason to believe that she is destructive at all in conflict. I'm just saying when I hear those phrases down the line, I often will find that it's a much more complicated story.
What about you?
I've been in some pretty brutal situations that I'm really proud of myself that I handled in a very calm way.
Yeah.
I was cheated on with someone that I was living with.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we lived together for 2 years, and like I saw.
Okay, so he's claiming that he was calm in conflict, which is a different word from logical. I'm more encouraged by that word. It doesn't necessarily mean that he was functional while he was being calm. Sometimes through predictive identification, listening to my deep dives on that, an individual will have a very common configuration in a dyad, in a relationship, a marriage, a romantic relationship, an attachment, is that both individuals come from trauma. Not always the case, but in this hypothetical, and each has a different way of coping with it. One person copes with the trauma by having their heart on their sleeve and being very quick to show emotion as a way of signaling to others what they're feeling, to try to eke out some tending to themselves. So they're frequently telling other and showing other people, and this is a neurological thing, it's not necessarily a choice, to try to game the system to get a little bit of attunement. And the other person will cope with it by shutting down their emotions. Each has a roiling sea of emotion, but one person definitely shows it, and the other person almost seems like the opposite, but they both have the same problem. They both have a lot of hurt and a lot of pain and a lot of worry, but the calm one deals with it by stuffing it and usually drinking or drugging, marijuana or some other kind of vice to distract them, or avoidance of closeness or relationships in general, or cheating themselves or that sort of thing. So they can think of themselves as being calm, but underneath all of that is a lot of pain, and from the outside, it's clear that the individual is suffering to someone that knows where to look. But anyway, I want to say that Alex and Madison seem like very lovely people, and they seem like they have a lot of extremely positive qualities, honestly. So I'm only just prompted to talk about this from what they're talking about. But anyway, so we're learning that Alex was cheated on by someone that he was living with, so a partner that was serious enough to live with, which we hadn't learned before. And Madison is like, oh my God, that's so terrible. And he's saying that he saw some texts, so he discovered his partner was cheating.
Some texts, and it was really bad, but we figured it out.
You guys stayed together?
No, we didn't.
Have you ever?
Okay, so the full context of what he was saying was this was an example of how in conflict he can be calm. So according to his narrative, he was cheated on and was not calm and talked it out in a calm way, but ultimately decided not to stay together. So yeah, that is encouraging. It's hard to know what actually happened, but that is, and I would be encouraged by that. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for subscribing to this YouTube channel and liking any of my videos like this one. I've started to do that a lot more on YouTube when I even just mildly like something. I like to give it's pretty easy to do, right? And it's just a little token of appreciation that is often seen. I look at them, and but only if you care to. Also, I've started to do the bell icon thing with my go-to YouTube channels that I watch. I like to watch a lot of science and a lot of history and entertainment and Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and that kind of stuff. So I never want to miss an episode, and you can't depend on the algorithm on YouTube to feed you the stuff that you really want to see. So I've been going to the YouTube channels I like and not only subscribing, but also doing the bell thing. I can't remember. It's like send me notifications, right? And then I get a little notification in, I tend to watch on a computer, and so it'll be in that bell icon, the little red dot thing, and then I can see when the really important YouTube channels, because, typically people will subscribe to dozens, if not hundreds of YouTube channels, and it's hard for the algorithm to know which ones are like ones you like and ones you like really need to see every episode. And so if you're one of those folks and you want to make sure you catch all the episodes, then the bell icon, I don't know, I find that really helps. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.